match of Group B, Jony and Whap. We've got... I'm going to get caught up real quick. Catching it live, which is awesome. Let's flip the board. Wait, flipping the board causes it to reset to the current position. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so Whap with the white pieces and Jony with the black pieces. And we've got the Caro-Kann again on the board. This time in advanced. I think that's what it's called. So the e5 stifles the black position a little bit, but it's always possible that if you advance the pawns too far, it's difficult to defend them and they'll become targets. So we see the same idea as in Jony's other games against Guitar, where he's putting his pawns on light squares, getting his bishop out, trading it off, and then building a solid light squared structure now that he doesn't have a light squared bishop to get trapped behind them. This is like the fundamental principle of the Caro-Kann. And then pushing c5 immediately to try to attack. So now this looks like a French defense. This sort of structure is very reminiscent of the French defense, but black doesn't have the light squared bishop, which is kind of nice. But at the same time, black spends 2 moves to get the pawn to c5, so it's compensation both ways. White plays the check, and then supports the center. And we've got a regular chess position here. We've got a fork situation, check on the king, as well as hitting the bishop, but white has 1 move to rule them all. Both blocks the check, and then you can't capture the bishop because the knight's defending it. So black brings reinforcements, now threatening to take the knight, and if white retakes, then the bishop would be hanging. Remove the defender. Remove the defender. So, yep, so we see white trade the bishop off, so the position is very equal in terms of material. Stops the pin. Develop the knight, and probably castle, yep. And immediately threatening the pawn on d4. Another option would be castling. Get your king to safety, but looks like Jony wants to be a little bit more aggressive, hitting this pawn, and it's not that easy to defend the pawn. Aha! So, if you try to defend the pawn directly, you could maybe move the queen over, then c5 is probably coming again. And it's going to be tough to hold, so rather than defend it directly, white says, I've got my own thread. You can take my pawn, I'm going to take your bishop. And then you might think... Actually, I think you still can, because you could take the pawn, take the bishop, then you take the queen with check. It looks like black's queen would be hanging, but black would be recapturing with check. So I think this is considerable for black. White can move the queen over, hitting the bishop, and then you defend. It's complicated. It's complicated. Maybe it's too much. Anyway, black drops back instead and hits the queen. So now so this is tough now. There's 2 pieces hitting the d4 pawn, and it's not defended at all yet. So what do you do? What do you do if you're Whap? You, again, find your own threat. It's like, okay, you can take my pawn, but then I'm going to take your pawn. I think black could take with the queen. It'll be defended by the knight, and this knight is still defending the g7 pawn. Okay, that's what we see. Queen trade. And black is up a pawn. Black is up a pawn. Otherwise, the position is completely equal, but black is up a pawn, and this d pawn is passed. There's no pawns standing in its way. So I think we've got a good game for black here. Still very close, still anyone's game, but black certainly with an edge at this point. So what's the plan here? So f6 weakens e6, but it threatens white's only central pawn. Okay, and we see a trade. Now taking with the bishop makes sense. This bishop's really good. Although black might look to trade it off. I think you could consider taking with the rook, because then you're immediately threatening e6. Something to think about. But at the same time, the black rook might be eyeing white's bishop on f4, so any kind of like knight moves would potentially end up with a rook hitting the bishop, and that could be potentially troubling. So I think it's principled to take with the bishop. Okay, slides over. I guess maybe to support the e. This is actually kind of surprising to me because I think the rook is better placed on the f file, because it's pretty open. Putting it back here, it makes sense to defend this pawn, but you don't need to defend it yet. So I'm not too sure about that one. Okay, so white targets and black is defending it. Makes sense. Hitting the knight moves, probably looking to relocate to c5, which is a really nice square. Not only can it not be attacked by any pawns, but it also will be attacking e6. Okay, this knight move, probably looking to play knight to c2, hitting the rook and the a3 pawn, very tricky. Okay, so offering the exchange of bishops, and then, okay, so now this is not hitting the rook anymore. Makes sense. a5. Oh, and we have caught up. Okay, we are live. Hype. So black's still up a pawn, still looking better for black. A good solid structure in the center of the pawns. The knight is a little bit awkward, I would say, on d4. It's not defended at all. It is doing a good job of defending black's pawns, but it just looks a little awkward, I would say. Let's see. Okay. So white's king has an escape space, so not worried with any back rank checkmates here. If you take with the rook, you threaten the knight. Probably knight moves here, and then it's hitting the rook and the pawn. If you take with the pawn, that looks fine. I think if you take with the pawn, then you can drop your knight back to c5, and it's never moving. It's a really strong square for it. You could move your knight back immediately, but then I think rook captures, and you'll be down pawns. Okay, so white recaptures with the pawn. Makes sense. So what are the plans here? I think for black, the idea is to push this d pawn, like just to push these 3 pawns, but primarily thinking about promoting the d pawn. And so usually you want to put your rooks behind them, and they can just march to victory. Yeah. If you're white, these 2 pawns are still potential liabilities because they're not being defended as well. So Like, I think in this case, I'm sure the knight's going to come back to c5, and then you're hitting e6 twice. It's defended twice, but this knight is going to get kicked away. You could slide your rook over here, and then this knight's going to have to move. Uh-huh. But if you try to kick the knight this way, the rook recaptures on b4. This is a tricky position. Maybe it's time to get your king into the action? Huh. These this is quite a tricky endgame. Knights are very tricky, and when they're both in the center like this, you always have to be afraid of forks. There's always tricky knight forks to watch out for. Like, immediately black could play this, hitting the rook and the pawn. Probably it's okay. White can slide the rook over here and have two defenders. Then maybe that opens up the lanes to start pushing pawns. Okay, getting the king involved. So now there's 3 defenders on the e6 pawn. So it's defended pretty well. The c6 pawn is still... It's defended twice, but it's since white's knight is on c5, it's hard to get a rook attacking it. So I don't really know what you do as white here. It just doesn't look like very much fun. Let's see. You could slide this rook over anytime to hit the knight. The knight has to move. Getting here might be a little bit dicey. You might be worried about straying too far. Okay, we got the king sliding over. Where do you want the king, though? I guess the plan is to march the king up like this. Have the king be the piece that dislodges the black knight. Okay, and we've got a pawn advancement. So now, now the knight is defended, so it's harder to kick it away. But now it's only defended once, so now we're attacking it twice again. Black's rook. It could be some kind of pins, but currently both rooks are being defended. The white rook being defended by the f2 pawn, and the black rook being defended by the king on f7. So marches forward. How do you want to play this? Okay, knight over here. Not back to c5, but over to f4. What is this threatening? So immediately, it doesn't work right now, but knight captures d5 would be a fork on the 2 black rooks. Of course, black can just recapture, so it's not really working right now. Ooh. This is such a strong structure for black. There's only one weakness, the pawn on c6. The other two, like having a strong pawn chain like this, you can really see the benefit of having your pawns be on adjacent files like this where they can support each other. Whereas white's lone pawn over here on the b file is very sad. It's lonely. It's got no friends. No one likes it. It's very Gollum-esque. It's being hit twice and only defended once. And the only ways you could defend it would be to swing this rook over, but then it gets captured by the knight. Or swing this knight over, but black's pawns Black's pawns are tough. I think putting the knights, if we go back a couple moves, I think the knight had to return to c5 so that it's eyeing the b7 square so the rook can't slide over like that. You still could bring the rook back and then over, but then there's potentially a fork on d7. I don't know. This square c5 looks like a really good square. f4. I'm not. It doesn't have any immediate threats. It's not really guarding relevant squares. Lots of it's kind of controlled by a lot of black pieces, or its scope is controlled. Okay, but we're fighting back. Okay, so black gobbles up the pawn on b4. White swung the rook over to a3 so that white would be able to play this rook a7 check. White has to be extremely careful, though. We've got checkmate in one move possibilities. Got to be extremely careful here. I think maybe G... Yeah, okay. Moving the G pawn. Giving yourself some Luft, as they say. Some air, some breathing room. Let's see. Black could lose the game right away by playing c5, which would allow this knight captures d5 fork. And chooses not to lose the game. Very smart. Top tier plays. This is tough for white. At a top level, this is probably resignable for white, but I think we'll, at our level, still plenty of mistakes to be made by both players. But two connected passed pawns is black, and there's not a lot of pieces on the board for white to deal with them. Black still has to be very precise, but it's the path to victory is very clear for black. Okay, this is interesting. So you could trade knights and capture the pawn. But I think it's wise to not trade the knights, because I think you capture the g7 pawn, but then your pieces are too far away to come back in time to stop these pawns. So keeping the pieces on the board, probably for the best. Probably for the best. Yeah, okay. So this is being hit twice. It's being defended twice currently, but the black knight is being threatened now. And you can't defend it. You have to move it or lose it. This would be a nice square, but it's defended by the knight. So this pawn is dropping off. With check, it's dangerously close to checkmate. There's only one square for the king. Wow, this could get really spicy. There could be variations where the king moves up, pawn moves up, check, capture, rook captures, h7, checkmate. No. King can go to g6 there. Never mind. But still, this can lead to variations where these two pawns both drop off, and then this game is real spicy. This is anyone's what do you can't call it a ball game, right? There's no balls, but what do you call it? A peace game? Is anyone's board game? Is that the proper nomenclature? Very resilient play by Whap here with the white pieces. Guy's got alligator blood. So you can take this pawn with either your rook or your knight, but I think you want to take it with the rook because it forces the king to the edge of the board. Yeah, and if en passant weren't a thing, you could potentially push this pawn up and then do the checkmate thing. But okay, so what do you do now as white? I think you probably bring your rook over to c7 so that black can't immediately push the c pawn because you'll capture it. And also, it kind of forces the black knight to remain there in the center. It's a great square for the knight, don't get me wrong, exerting its influence over quite a lot of squares, but the principal duty there would be defending c6. Okay. Is this a bait? Yeah, okay, so this allows black to move the pawn to c5. I don't see a checkmate for white with these pieces. This pawn is defending the knight. If you bring the knight... Okay, so you can't bring the knight over anymore. Oh, the rook could be dropping off. King over here. Then you could play check. King captures, check. King has to move to g6, remember? But then the rook drops down, check, skewering the king to the rook. That would have been one option, but black would have had ways to get out of it. It looks like white is content to just have a solid structure here. I mean, it's not, they're not defending each other, but they're really limiting the king's movement. Like the black king feels very bad right now. It can't do anything. And it's difficult to defend the d5 pawn. It's actually impossible. What is this knight? What? Okay, it's a tactic. If you take my knight, I take your knight, but why don't you just... You don't have to take. Just take the pawn. Just... There's... Because, man... This pawn is a hero. There would be a fork here, but... the f2 pawn prevents it. Okay, take this pawn. Okay, knight has to... I guess... Oh, the knight could go here. That could get... Okay, probably safer to come back here. But now this pawn is dropping off. We've got an even game. This is looking like a draw now. Wow, hats off to whap. This is why well, we can clearly see from this performance why whap was in the finals last year. Excellent play. It's not over yet. It's certainly not over yet. Certainly not over yet. I think either player still could make a mistake and lose. However, the material is equal. Neither side has a passed pawn, because these pawns kind of watch each other. So it doesn't look easy for either player to win, I would say. But still a lot of board game left to play. It's not actually that much, but we'll see. What are the ideas here? So I think the G pawn is white's biggest liability right now. Black's E pawn is eyeing the f3 square, because like white would like to push the pawn to defend, but couldn't because it would be captured. Interesting, putting the rook here. I don't really know how either player makes progress here. You hit the pawn. Yeah, maybe black should have just pushed to trade off the pawns, just to... Because I think if anyone is playing for a win, it's probably white, because white has connected pawns and blacks are split. Pushing with check. Okay, so this is pinned. You can't capture because you're pinned. Defending this pawn, your only option is to drop the rook back. You could also move your king to e2. And then if black captures with the rook, then you capture the e3 pawn. But if black captures with the pawn, this knight is defending the rook is defending the pawn. Somehow everything is defended. Oh, there's a discovery. What? Wait. Why not? Oh, because the knight captures and then defends the rook. Okay, I was looking at the king capturing, then the rook drops. But the knight can capture the pawn on e2, which then also defends the rook. Very cool. Wow, Johnny is pissed. Look at this attack. I don't know if there's enough here for black to be able to win, but this looks really menacing now. You don't want to take this pawn, because you're going to get forked. Remember, knights are tricky. Still, there's still a fork here. If this knight could go here, let's see, or maybe you could... So this knight is defending the pawn on e3, and the pawn on e3 defends the rook, so it's everything's held together, but just barely. It's very precarious. You'd like to move the pawn or the knight so that you could threaten knight e2, forking the king and rook, but your pawn's going to drop off and the position collapses. So how do you actually... I feel like you need to get your king in, but the only way to get your king in is to take this pawn, which opens up this fork. You can't, because the knight watches both of the other squares, so the king can't move. I mean, maybe you take a big walk. Ooh, push the pawn. Spicy. So you can take the rook, but then black gets a queen, defended by the knight. So other options, you can sacrifice your knight for the pawn. And then you're down a knight as white, and you got to try to hold. That's tough. I think... Okay. Slides the rook over, but this... Oh man, this is so complicated. Yeah, check. Because it's like... If you, it looks like black or white is hanging the rook, black captures, but then white captures here, so it's a rook trade, and now you can't promote the pawn because there's nothing defending it, the e1 square. But I think, yeah, okay, very tricky. This is a very rook e3, very tricky move, but Johnny found the punish, which is to throw in this check, so that now the rook is supported, and now you can take the rook, and black or white's king can't capture because very cool. Promotes to queen, and that is the end of game one. Johnny takes it with the black pieces. But that was I mean, great game by Johnny. Don't get me wrong, great game by Johnny, but I'm impressed by Whap. I can't believe that he brought that back from being down two pawns which were connected and passed. He fights like a hyena. Evens the material. Ultimately does fall, but... Oof. This will be an interesting one to look at with the engine. Let me see. Okay, so we'll have this... Their second match. So Johnny now with the white pieces, Whap with the black pieces. But let's take a quick look. I want to turn on the engine and just see. Was there a hold? Okay, so this is a draw. Wow, you have to bring your knight back to h1. That's unthinkable. That is unthinkable. I never would have thought of that. That looks so bad, but it's the only move. Or I guess rook here also works. Because you got to prevent the advancement of this pawn. Let's see. Okay. Wow, white has the advantage here. Oh, this was the bad move. You got to get the knight off the edge of the board hitting this pawn. So it's better to threaten the d pawn with your knight rather than the rook. Because then your rook is still keeping an eye on the e pawn, so the e pawn can't advance. Wow! I can't believe that knight f5 works and is like the only move here. What a tactical resource by Jony. And so this should be a draw according to, or it can be a draw with perfect play according to the engine. All looks good, and then here check, fine, but then you I don't know how you find the knight h1. And then after this, really nice sequence from black to finish the game off. Wow. Great finish, great game. All right, game number 2. Numero dos, Nummer 2. Oh. So Jony opens with e4, and then this defense, I don't remember what this defense is called. Is this Alekine's defense? The basic theory is that you kind of bait your opponent into playing e5, which is fine. And then the knight goes here, black threatens it like this. Or whatever. Basically, white plays a ton of pawn moves, and black only moves this knight around. And then the game ends up being, did white overextend, and is black able to capitalize on the weaknesses and take the pawns? Or is white going to have such an overwhelming lead in development that black is unable to equalize? But instead it turns into this 4 knights game, so if black plays here, it's like the same as the match 2. I think it was match 2, Jony and Guitar. Interesting. This, I think this is a trick. Is this a trick? It hangs the pawn. But is that a trick? I don't remember. I feel like that might be a trick. A trap, an opening trap. But it looks, if you take the pawn, then there's, both of those moves are forcing. There's no checks here. Huh. I'm not sure. I know there are positions where this is a trap. I don't remember. I think normally there's one where the bishop is out. Because then some crazy stuff happens on f2. Okay, but either way, Jony. So Jony is like playing. I feel like he's got this style where he moves his bishop out, and then he puts his pawns on the light squares. It's how he plays every game with black, and now he's doing the same thing with white. Gotta be careful here. So this knight is hitting the bishop. Okay, yeah. And it's defended, but only by the knight, which is now pinned to the king. So white drops the bishop back. I wonder why. I mean, you don't want to take the knight, because then after the pawn recaptures, this knight's getting hit by the pawn and it can't move because it's pinned to the king. So it makes sense to drop it back. This is kind of... I think you could play d5. Okay, c6 first. Oh no, you can't play d5. Because you would lose your king. So you probably want a castle first. But I think white has not... Okay, now... So is there a trick here? Whap gives up a pawn in the center. Huh. This looks like a potential idea. You hit the knight and you hit the bishop, but it's not enough to capture the bishop. Oh wait, actually it is, because the knight's pinned. No, queen here. Doesn't this work? If you can support the knight, but then the bishop falls. You can move the bishop, but then the knight falls. I think that's winning a piece. It's tricky. You got to see that the knight isn't actually defending the bishop because of the pin. Okay, I think that was working. Now there's no pin. I think you could still try... You could still go for bishop takes knight, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, and then queen here. I think queen a5 was just not on Whap's radar. It looks like that wasn't something he was considering, because I'm pretty sure there was something there. Not 100% sure. We can check after. We'll definitely want to check after with the engine, but with the check engine light. This could look pretty good for white now. You can play f4 to strengthen your knight in the center. Does open up this diagonal, which there's still... Black has two pieces which could take advantage of it, so f4, often a good move, but one you want to think about before playing. But in general, it's usually preferable to push your pawns to support your pieces in the center, rather than, like, if you just move your knight back, you're still up a pawn. It's good. Okay, yeah, it's good. It's fine. You're up a pawn. You're happy. But maybe you could have got a little more. Pin. I think, so, Jony, with the white pieces, he's up a pawn. He's certainly up a pawn. But black's pieces look pretty scary. All the minor pieces are out and pretty active. The king is still in the center, which is not ideal, but still options castling either way. Castling queenside could get really spicy, putting the rook on d8, the same file as the opponent's queen, so then if there's like pawn takes, then this could be really unpleasant. Not to mention, I mean, that looks actually really good, because we'll see what white's defensive resource is, but this knight, or this bishop all the way over here on a4 is not supporting the f3 knight anytime soon. So this f3 knight being pinned, that's kind of a problem. With black's knight on d4, that's kind of a problem. That's... what's the counterplay? Oh, I think probably trading here. So this knight is actually loose. This could get really spicy. So the idea is if you recapture, you can actually slide... Well, you can't take with your queen because you'll lose it. If you take with the knight or the pawn, then the queen slides over, giving a check. And then this knight's no longer pinned. So then the knight on f3 can capture the knight, which would be hanging loose on d4. Very sharp position, very sharp. I think it may be prudent to just castle and go all in. With another option being you could trade here, it's got to recapture with this, then you can drop your bishop. But your king being in the center of the board exposed like this is pretty terrifying. It's pretty terrifying. Okay, nice. I think that makes a lot of sense. White's going to go up by several pawns, but this could get real scary real fast. If you just gobble up another pawn, you might immediately lose. Knight takes, pawn takes, bishop here, rook slides over, and then like you just got to get your queen on the G file somehow. Okay. Ooh, that's very cute. White might be holding this. There's a couple problems here. Number one, your queen is attacked, so you got to do something. If you take it, which looks like the most natural move, and is fine, white recaptures and strengthens the center, which is very nice. Also, since the knight on c3 moved, now white can play c3, which immediately looks great because it's a fork. Also, it gives your bishop a square to come back to reroute against the enemy king, which is more of a long-term benefit. Black's actually this, but okay, so the black knight was on f6 here, which prevented black's queen from coming to g6. Now it's gone, so after this you can't move your rook because you're going to get checkmated. Is there a way to prevent checkmate, actually, at all? I don't know if there's a way to prevent checkmate. It's not even just a question of, like, give away the rook. You're happy to give away the rook. Okay, you slide your king over, right? Then if the queen comes over, the rook comes here and is just in time. I think king h1 is enough. If black could instantaneously teleport the bishop back to c7, then there'd be checkmate. But black, I haven't seen whap make a move like that yet. How does whap load Dota 2 during this game? Are you kidding me? Did that? I don't think that showed up because I have I'm only showing the window on stream, but whap literally just started Dota 2 during this game. How do you start Dota 2? Like, does he have this red as checkmate? And he's just convinced it's over? That's so cocky. I love that, actually, if that's what it was. I'm pretty sure this works. You drop the rook for the bishop, so black, I think black will be in better shape, especially with white's king being exposed. But I don't... Okay, let me take another peek. So this pawn is being defended. That way, okay. That's... You still play this, then you support the bishop and lose... You lose the bishop. You also... I think you gotta play queen g6 first. Okay, that's probably fine too, because if you move it, then this checkmate. Oh no, now the... Oh, wait, no, yeah... Oh! That's heartbreak. That's heartbreaking. White squirms out here. You gotta pin the bishop before it gets to h4. If you pin the bishop here, the only way to support it is by playing f4, and then you can play... Then you can play this pawn, and you'll capture the bishop for the pawn, and the king still looks pretty bad. You can't defend it with the queen because this bishop is here. But this way... this way... I think this... Oh... this, after you play check, then the bishop drops back. You still can take this one. You can also drop back here to threaten white's bishop, but I don't think you get anything crippling out of it. Why are you not pinning it? I guess hits here. Oh, that one I'm... Okay, that's fine. So that's still here. This... I think you want the bishop on... Don't you want to trade off this bishop? All the while... So one thing I want to comment on that I think is classy and good style is Black has had several chances to just take the rook on f1 and has chosen not to because... Okay, and white saves it. But this bishop is like... The king is so sad. This bishop is worth like almost a queen for how effective it is against the enemy king. Wait, why? I think... Don't you need to push this? I guess I'm still not seeing why Black didn't put the queen on the g file and then try to exploit the pin. I know the king can move over, but that was the... Whatever. We'll look forward, not into the past, but I really think queen g6 was a crushing blow. Okay, so we've got a pretty spicy position here still. Pretty spicy. There's potential... Okay, anytime you see the queen and bishop lined up like this, you got to look at the possibilities of checkmate here. Right now it's okay. The king can slide over. The queen can give a check and the king can escape. But if this pawn were vanished from the board, then the rook would be guarding the e7 square. So we'd have a two-move checkmate. So I think white is really going to want to play e5 and just ram this pawn as far forward as possible, threatening this kind of checkmate, whatever stuff. What's the point of this? Huh. Okay, another... Oh, there's a lot to look at in this position. Okay, so finally we're trying to get rid of the bishop. Smart. The pawn on f3 is defended only once by the queen. That's one thing to keep in mind. And now it's not... now it's advanced. Now this could be a weakness. It's still defended 3 times, so it's probably fine. Trades, trades. Gotta be careful here. Wait. Yeah, trades, trades. I like taking a second there to look at if there's a potential checkmate. But then this bishop... Oh, man. That's, that is a bummer. I'm not sure... I expect whap to play on... And we've seen whap be extremely resilient in his last game. So I'm not going to call this over, but he is down a bishop and a pawn, which is worse than last game where he was only down 2 pawns. But I mean, it should be said that Johnny's king is exposed, no g-pawn. So there will be all game long, as long as the queen is still on the board, there will be all kinds of these check, fork, whatever, you know. Repeat. Repeat. Always repeat. Yes. Are they going to agree to a draw by repetition here? Okay, so for instance, there's tricks here. You can't take this because the pin. That would be a way for whap to get back into the game quickly. You take with a bishop, you're just gonna lose the bishop. So this is very tricky still. as we saw in the last game, which was also a tricky game, it's definitely possible. In a similar situation when whap was behind, he played some very, very nice sequences and ultimately was able to even out the game and even take the lead. So gotta be careful. I think rook a to d1 is really nice. Ooh, now the queens are gonna come off. Yeah, jony takes it immediately. It's much harder to lose this game now with white. It's much harder to lose the game now. I think another option would have been to move the queen here, but then if you get chased, I guess you come back and you're fine. But I guess you could take this pawn. Oh, no, it's defended. Here, if you end up getting chased into the corner, that's miserable. So I understand why. But yeah, this is tough now. Jony up a bishop and a pawn. There's not a lot stopping. It's going to be tough to prevent this. And it looks like only chance really is if black somehow gets a pawn on f3 and then back rank checkmate. Takes the pawn, hitting the rook. This is a great move, great style. Cutting off the king so the king cannot advance forward to support the pawns. So I think this is the only possibility for black once white defends that. Oh, and it's not even checkmate actually, because this bishop can come back. So it would have to be an incredible throw. I think the simplest way for white is to rook d7, which forces the rook trade because it pins the rook to the king. Okay, so if he's got to throw. If he moves the bishop somehow and allows this checkmate, that would be insane. Okay, captures the last pawn, so now it's... Now there's no... You just push the pawn. Looks like jony is going to escape with another win. Hangs the rook. Good style. And resigns. Good resign sequence from jony. I want to look at the... I want to see if whap had that pin. It was... I mean, fork. Knight takes e5. Yes! It does. Queen a5 does work. Looks like the best move is to put your knight here. Take this, take this. And this is a crazy different game, but in this variation, black is up a piece. D5 loses that opportunity. And this one, oh, I see. Drops back, but it would be a little bit better to develop the bishop and put pressure on the queen this way. Looking at potential discoveries like this, maybe? I guess I was thinking f4. How bad is f4? f4 is okay. It's not optimal. Bishop c4, or bishop f4 is optimal, but... And then this, we gotta see if there's a checkmate here. Yeah, white is leading by points. Okay, so there's no forced checkmate here. It does think the best move is king h1, as I was thinking, so you can take the rook, and then black is up 2 rooks and a bishop for 2 bishops and a rook, so better for black. And I definitely admire the spirit. Um, rather than no, it was yeah, this one, I think this was just the key move. This one, it's so important to see that the bishop is on the same file as the king and there's nothing else between them. So the first thing that pops into your head has to be queen g6, pinning the bishop to the king. And especially in this case, it can only be defended by the pawn. So the variation, so if you defend it like this, okay, I guess it's actually optimal to take this pawn. But anyway, the simple way would be take the rook, and then this way. I guess white could recapture this way, and then you take this. Anyway, but yeah, kicking the bishop like this allows it to get back. So then now, if you bring the queen over to g6, the bishop can just go down to, yeah. So it's like check, you bring the bishop back, and then you want to push this pawn to try to, if black does whatever. Oh well, yeah, okay, without losing the queen. Then this, you can't take the pawn because of the pin. So anyways, white's going to play here to relieve the pin, and then you get the swap, and then you get to trade in the center. So it's still good for, I guess this one is even, because white's position is, this bishop is much better placed than when it's on c1 in the other variation, where if you just go here immediately, then after this, and takes, it's kind of the same position, but this bishop is kind of trash still, being stuck here. If the bishop teleports to g3 in this position, pretty nice. Much better. So that's the difference between this variation being 1.8 in favor of black, as opposed to the other variation being equal. Oops. Drops back, and then, yeah, again, here, I think seeing this pin is important. I know, like, this makes sense to hit the pawn, but Jony found a really nice defense here to kick the bishop while defending your pawn. And then here, I think, yeah, it's, I'll stop beating a dead, sorry, I'll stop feeding a fed horse. But queen to g6. If the queen were on g6 instead of f6, then bringing your bishop back here threatens the bishop on g3, and then allows the trades. Anyway, saving the rook is actually a mistake. I guess the computer still wants black to advance this pawn. And then I'm not sure, I feel like the important area of the board is still the center and the king side, so I feel like this is a thank you move. It's like white's bishop is not in a good spot. White would like to bring it back here and then push up so that it's actually doing something. And when you play this kind of move, b5, you're weakening your c6 pawn, and you're also encouraging your opponent, like, yes, please relocate your bishop to a better square. Oh, and then, yeah, it looks like these pawns are going to start rolling now. Getting the bishop to g3 was pretty pivotal, because the king now is pretty safe, and these pawns supported are going to start rolling. Let's see, yeah, this doesn't really accomplish that much. Looks like it really wants white to play e5. Still e5. Because if you take, oh right, there's this. So if you take, it all comes down to this. If you just keep trading everything, you don't have that great of an advantage anymore. It's still good for white, but not as good. But if you threaten this, if you move the bishop back, then there's checkmate. Yeah. This is one thing we talked about I talked about, stupid we, during the game live. this threat of checkmate is there, but only if white is controlling the e7 square as the escape route. So I think this was the oversight from whap this game. I think he didn't see that after bishop takes, queen takes, that the bishop on h3 would be hanging, and that's there's still some potential tricks here, but ultimately I think at this point it's a difficult game for black. Yeah, did not realize you can just go king h1. Yeah, I mean it's still really scary. I mean, this is the position where you can go king h1, because it looks like if you do this to try it, then the rook slides over, and actually probably white's about to win the game with this counterattack. But yeah, king slides over, rook captures. The game continues. It's still anyone's game, but up a rook for a bishop, it's got to be good for black, good for whap. But and then yeah, the ultimate punishment was after this, gotta pin the bishop to the king. Yeah, one I could tell, and it's a decent idea. If it's your only way to live, obviously you got to do it, right? I guess because you were probably planning you'd support it that way, and then it gets killed or whatever, you know. But yeah, I like how ultimately, if the king slides over. Okay, so wait, if you support it with f4, I like how actually the best move is queen takes e4. That kind of move is so dirty. It's like that's just so dirty. It like maintains all of the advantage, but it removes a crucial structural component of white's center. So if you try to kick it, then you get checked. It's like then you lose this bit. Like the stuff that the computer finds is absolutely disgusting sometimes. All right, so queen d3, and I hope he trades queens. Yeah, I think there's so many different options. If you do queen d3 here, well, you're gonna get checkmated, so it's probably after this. Yeah, this is super complicated, but this is super unpleasant for for white. Once the bishop is here like this, I think the turning point of the game was this knight move. Because after takes, this is a great sequence by black. The exchanges and then bishop h3. This is just fantastic. Really good find. It's like you just wish you didn't have these pawns. That they just get in the way. If you just didn't have the pawns, then it'd be pretty easy. Especially the f2 pawn, you could just slide up the queen. Fork the bishop and knight on c3, but the yeah, it's seeing that this, especially that this comes with check, so you have to deal with it. Yeah, and because this looks pretty strong, because not only it's threatening the queen, but unveiling the c3 fork, but a few moves deeper. Yeah, great game, great series. That was I'm getting excited again. These are the kind of games I looked at I uploaded your games against guitar to YouTube as well, but I haven't posted the link yet. That was actually uploading. It probably finished at the beginning. I bet I dropped a ton of frames at the start of this, but yeah. So jony takes a pretty commanding lead in Group B, 4-0 start. But he's still got Sonic, who anything can happen. He's definitely the wild card, so I think those will be pretty exciting games. And well, I don't need to go on about the guitar match, which was very good quality as well. So, okay. So that's going to end it here. Johnny's got a commanding lead in Group B, so it's looking like he will almost certainly be one of the people to advance from Group B. But who will be the second one? It's totally up in the air. But I think whap looked pretty sharp today, pretty solid. So I think he's going to be the guy to beat for second place. And then still waiting on a lot of matches to get played in Group A. But hopefully those are coming soon.